Now your moment has arrived. Now your dream is finally been born. Black butterfly. Hi everyone, welcome to the Community Classroom. This is Dr. Tracey McCarthy, psychologist, attorney, and educator. And what we're going to be looking at today is an overview of the Community Classroom. So we're going to look at what the original goals were, what we've accomplished in the Community Classroom. We're going to do some reflecting. We're going to talk about renewed direction, and then we're going to recap the educational activities that have been provided in the Community Classroom along this journey. And then we're going to talk about next steps. And the world has come to see just how proud. And one thing I want to address with you before we go any further is this idea that many people have that they have gone through a process of miseducation all throughout school. And it's understandable that people feel that way, but generally speaking, it's probably not the case that most educators were intent on miseducating, purposely. And so I want to give you something to think about, and it's going to make sense when you think about it. Regardless of the degree that a person has, everyone pretty much went through a substantially similar education process from kindergarten on through high school. And so it didn't vary that much in terms of, that sort of standardized way that most people learned, or the standardized educational experience that they acquired. And so what happens sometimes when people put educators on a pedestal, it comes with a lot of thoughts and fantasies about what they know and what they should know and, what they should have done. But basically, most people are a product of their environments, and that includes educators. And so, no matter how high up they have gone in terms of education, they have all pretty much gone through that similar process. So if they went through a process where the teachers focused on what's in the book, then they focus on what is in the book, generally speaking. And so for many people, there's also this misunderstanding about how it works in terms of, there's a lot of complaints that I read about, PhDs, and why don't these PhDs do this, and why haven't they taught that? And so again, I'm going to share something, and once you think about it, it's going to make perfect sense as to why they may not have covered all of these things that you all have been brilliantly uncovering in all of your research. Okay, so let's take a PhD in history. And so history is a very broad topic, and so you've got all sorts of history under that general umbrella. But we're going to take someone and we're going to narrow their focus, because the higher up you go with this, the more narrow your focus is. And so you've got someone who is studying history, and then they narrow that down to African history, and they narrow that down to tribal customs, and then they narrow that down to tribal customs of one hunter-gatherer group in a specific nation in sub-Saharan Africa. And so you can see when someone's focus is that narrow, that they are probably not going to touch on or ever cover some of the things that you might be interested in. And so because it really depends on what they're interested in and what their passion might happen to be in life and in terms of history. And so they are not, if that's their specialty, that's their area of concentration, they're not going to then take leaps and start studying, the transatlantic slave trade or the Indian slave trade, or they're not going to be studying things in Asia. They are really going to be focused on what they're focusing on, and they're going to become an expert in that. So you can ask them anything about that and they can answer it. But if you go outside of that, they may not be as adept at answering those questions. So it's a fair expectation that you would have educators that would have all of this broad-based knowledge, but that's just simply not the case. And then in terms of brown academics, there are few of them. There are very few. And then when you get very few, then it's how many actually majored in and studied and got PhDs in history. And then when they got those PhDs in history, how was the focus narrowed? And so you've only got a few people and you've got so much history. And so they might study things like linguistics, of a particular group. And so they just may not be uncovering all of the stuff that you all are uncovering. Another issue is that sometimes students, or those who are feeling themselves being educated, they also may not take up as much responsibility as they should in terms of the educational process. Exploration is free, and there's no educator who's stopping anyone from exploring further. And so a lot of what happens also is that sometimes students are, when they are being educated, which means taking what is latent and making it manifest. So it's really bringing out the brilliance of the student versus the student taking in something from the teacher, if that makes sense. But often what happens is that the student is not motivated to go beyond whatever is being quote unquote taught. And so, sometimes it's hard to get them to even do their basic homework, let alone start doing some extra work, exploring topics that have nothing to do with what the teacher is requiring. And then parents also may not be having those expectations. So it's really a two-way street with the person who is doing the educating and the person who is processing, engaging in the educational process for themselves. And so just something for you to think about when you're processing that idea of having been miseducated, particularly at the collegiate level. So at the college level, grad level, it's really, there's a lot of independence there. And so, people really can explore on their own and take up whatever topics they find interesting. Now, I do want to say this in terms of YouTube, because this is a wonderful opportunity for this. And I don't think people really approach it this way, but you might want to think about it another way. One of the beautiful things about YouTube or social media where you can do something like this is you can take up the communal responsibility to learn collectively and individually piece together bits of knowledge that each member has to contribute. That's one of the beautiful things about the Aboriginal community. They would do these things they would call building. So they would be building things, and also saw that with the conscious community too. So you'd see this building dynamic. And so that's actually an amazing way to learn and to share information and to grow collectively. And so you can take a topic, and even though you're studying or looking at or researching the same topic, different people are going to see things from a different vantage point. So it shouldn't be a competition. It should really be, a collectivist, a community type of activity. But I did notice that there was a lot of sometimes, not necessarily within the communities, just in general on YouTube's, sort of a lot of competition in terms of, who's getting the most of something. But really, if you look at it in terms of, it's all one big piece and everybody is sharing, you might have a very different outcome and a very different experience of the YouTube experience. And also, taking notes. People probably don't take notes a lot, but there is a lot of information. Many of you are sharing. It's quite incredible. And so I do encourage you to start taking notes and keep a journal of things that people are sharing, because many of you have exhibited significant brilliance. If I haven't been able to let you know that, there's a lot of brilliance out there, and I have seen that. And so I just want to continue to encourage you in that direction. And, also just remember that the way that you get to the truth is by piecing together all of those little bits and pieces of information. And then you put them together, fits together like a puzzle piece. And then you have the whole picture. And if you remember the desiderata, remember everybody has something to share. And so don't discount anyone just because they may not seem, as literate as you might want someone to sound. They may not, have taken all of these classes and things like that. But, there's a bit of brilliance in every person. And so just be open to that. For those who join the community classroom primarily for the historical content and the reparations discussions that we were initially having, you should consider subscribing to some other channels that address those issues, such as channels that host Dr. Claude Anderson. He has a lot of information. The community classrooms sort of renewed direction is not going to be focusing on those issues anymore. And so we're going to talk about the direction, but you are definitely encouraged to seek out those individuals who are focusing on that. Now, what that means is that the numbers in terms of subscribers will probably go down significantly. And, you know, unlike other channels where they're like really trying to grow their channels, the channel numbers are actually higher than ever expected. And so, you know, if there were, 1,500, that would be good. That means you have probably about 10 real people, actually subscribe to your channel. And that would be a nice classroom size. So anyway, so we're going to be changing directions or just renewing our direction. And our upcoming topics are going to be focused on health and wellness and things that'll be productive for a general demographic. And so it won't be just so much directed to one demographic. And this is also going to do something known as resetting the analytics for the community classroom. Some of you may not realize how YouTube works. Once you start watching certain things, or you start focusing on a particular topic, that will be the only thing that you will get recommendations for. And so you'll just sort of be prone to kind of, continue down that direction. So if you type in reparations or you watch a video on reparations, you're going to get a bunch of recommendations for more stuff about slavery and reparations and hardship and things like that. And so they are not going to be topics that are going to elevate you. And so that's one of the things you have to be careful about when you're selecting YouTube content, because it will keep you in a particular space. So if you look at really heady topics a lot, it's going to keep you in those really heady spaces frequently. And so if you change it up and you listen to some music, it'll reset those analytics. And so we're going to reset the analytics for the community classroom, because also what you put out there, you also get back. And so whatever you put out in the community classroom, so whatever topic that's out there, there's going to be more of that coming back in the direction of the community classroom. And a lot of things, it's hard to be positive about what gives rise to needing reparations. And so what happens in terms of the analytics is the analytics become very negative and toxic, and the related content is also negative and toxic. And so you might think you're looking at a great topic related to Indian land trust, but when you really think about it, just the reason why you have to even look at Indian land trust, there's a negative reason for that. And so some of that content is eventually going to be negative, but we're going to be refocusing the energy and direction of the community classroom so that the analytics will be different. And one of the things that we want to refocus on are issues related specifically to men and boys. And so if you go back, in old content, a lot of people ignore that. There's a decided focus on men and boys. And so our focus is going to be on delivering content that's going to help to develop healthy men and healthy boys, so that they can grow up and evolve to be as healthy as possible. Because as many of you know, some of you may not know, there really is a sort of an attack on boys, an attack on men, and that's discussed in other videos. But healthy, well-functioning, adaptive men are required for the peace, safety, and common defense of any nation. And so we really have to engage in that focus on creating and developing and supporting the healthiest men possible, because when you have healthy men, you have healthy families, healthy homes, and then you have healthy neighborhoods and healthier communities. And so that is going to be a big part of the focus. And so there are already videos on fatherhood and child custody, helping fathers to get information so that they can more actively participate in their children's lives and get custody if that's in the best interest of the child and the family. And this is a sort of side note, but males and females have different energy. And so just in terms of an assessment of things, some of the debating and things like that, part of that stems from males having particularly more energy, for that sort of thing than females typically. And so there is the encouragement that perhaps instead of, or to supplement that, but, maybe getting out and getting more physical, because males and particularly boys are encouraged to sort of play down that physicality and play down all of that energy. But there probably needs to be space for encouraging more of that. So males getting out a little bit more, outside, doing things that are more active. Some people don't realize this. We're going to do some content on this, but the IQ dynamics for males and females, those are different. And we don't have a lot of educational spaces set up to meet the giftedness of males. And males, tend to have more giftedness in terms of perceptual dynamics, hand-eye coordination sorts of things. And there's a tendency to steer people away from that. But that is the gifting that many males have. And so we're going to talk about how to tie the gifting in with, the real world instead of, sort of pushing that sort of thing down. And so we're going to look at those sorts of things and, just how that energy, that male energy can be redirected, and so that it's not detrimental. And so particularly on YouTube, people, get kind of aggressive on YouTube and things like that. And it's not always, in their best interest. It's not a healthy thing to do for many of them. But there are some things that can be done, just out in the real world. And we're going to talk about that. And so as we're rounding this out, we're going to do a recap, and we're going to go over what we've covered so far in terms of educational activities in the community classroom. And so we're going to look at, just kind of go over the videos that have been created, the content that's been covered, so that you can kind of remember in terms of, where we've gone, and you can start to think about, where you need to go. So what might have been missing. And there are a few series that were not completed, still have the information, but those series were not completed. But we're going to give you this information for recapping, and then you can sort of create your own sort of syllabus for where you want to go from here.
Are you free? And the world has come to see.
Okay, so let's do a recap, and some of these are clustered together. And so first thing that we covered, the very first thing, was what is a mental disorder. And then there was coverage for all of the major psychological disorders for children, teens, and adults. And so we covered behavior disorders and learning disorders, intellectual disability, Asperger's, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, the cluster B disorders, Alzheimer's. We covered the insanity defense and competence to stand trial, and bullying. And then we went on to cover sex and gender education for children and some of the problems that are inherent to current sex and gender education. We talked about education versus indoctrination. We talked about alternative dispute resolution in terms of legal processes. We explored reactive attachment disorder, silencing the inner critic, self-awareness, self-esteem, self-efficacy. We had a series on child custody and parenting for fathers. We also covered boys' rights and immigration policies. We also covered disability and special education services, and there will be more resources for disability, because we want to make sure that when people are filing for disability that they have all the resources that they need. And we also covered child abuse and neglect, and even touched on Omarosa Manigault. We covered, as we made that detour, we began to cover race and ethnicity. We covered legal standing, interethnic violence, self-love, slavery. We looked at study abroad for students in the Americas who were looking for scholarship and study opportunities that may not be available in their homelands. We looked at censorship and the term akata. We also, of course, explored reparations and did a complete, very lengthy series on that. We covered equity, justice, identity politics, and the gender wars. We covered race and skin color. We covered global law. We covered equity and the idea of clean and unclean hands. We looked at the power of naming and the importance of naming. We looked at the East Indians. We looked at health issues that are specific to African Americans and Indians in America. We looked at global law, DNA, Indian land trusts information. We also looked at reparations research, and we explored the forensic issues surrounding the Amber Geiger situation. And we looked at reparations in terms of Africa. We looked at the right of return. We looked at the Kingdom of Judah. We looked at the Akan and Negro land. We looked at ancestry from Europe for brown people. We looked at issues such as psychological manipulation and deception. We looked at self-knowledge and the idea of privilege. We also looked at indigenous identity, of course, and we looked at the identity and issues related to Indians. Particularly, we looked at things related to the Choctaw and the Choctaw. We looked at issues related to the Moors, and you were treated to significant Louisiana street music. We looked at issues such as voting, so there was material on that. We looked at looking beyond race when tracing your ancestry. We looked at African kings in America and the real Negus. We looked at the 13th Amendment, and you have received some information about the courts and legal power and jurisdiction and status. And perhaps most important for many people who may not have felt like they could be included in the process, we applied scripture to certain things as we could, and that allowed more people to participate and get something more personal out of the educational experience. Now, to talk about our getting back on track here, what we're going to do is we are going to eventually have the videos cached into different content areas so that people will be able to come to this particular channel and go to a particular cache and find what they're looking for in terms of psychological issues and legal issues. And so there will be the diagnostic cache for those who want information on a variety of diagnoses, and that will be primarily just for anyone, but also for attorneys who need information for their clients in terms of defending their clients in criminal cases. And so it also will be primarily structured for those who are going through disability processes. So that will be helpful information there. And then the general legal information will also be available, and it will be cached on the channel. Now, what we are going to be doing is we're going to be changing directions and spending some time on the much neglected Infinite Health and Wellness channel. And so we're going to be over there. And that format is going to be substantially different. There's already stuff over there. And it's, very much focused on health and wellness, whether we're talking about food or whether we're talking about behavior, we're talking about motivation. And so what we're going to do over there is we're going to continue that focus. And what's going to happen is we're going to create some playlists of YouTube resources, and we will be selecting content providers who provide content on particularly health and wellness issues and legal issues. And so we're going to have caches over there, and we're going to focus on things like, more recently, on motivation. We're going to have some spiritual playlist. We're going to have musical playlist, and we're going to have things that are both secular and spiritual. And we're also going to have things again for men. Sometimes men feel kind of left out in those types of things. And so if people are looking for a drama-free space to learn and explore some health and wellness issues, the Infinite Health and Wellness channel will be the perfect space for that. And so if you have some content suggestions, things that you would like to cover in that area, you can head over there and start to think about doing that. You don't have to subscribe. This is not a monetized channel or process. This is a community service project, and so there will never be a monetized process. Google, YouTube, I don't know if you hear me there, but we won't be monetizing the channel. And so hopefully they will support that, continue to be supportive of that for individuals who just want to participate. So again, you don't have to subscribe to anything. You can just drop by whenever you feel like dropping by. Now, if you have any playlist suggestions, any caches you want created or you would like for us to think about, you can put those down in the comment section, or you can drop those off in the on the other channel. I'll put the link to that other channel down below also. And as we depart here, I want to encourage you to think about the song Black Butterfly by Denise Williams, and I'm going to put the link for that down below also. It is really a song of struggle, of growth, of metamorphosis, of overcoming, and just being generally resilient. And what most people don't understand is the fact that they are still here today after so much that many people have gone through. That is in and of itself miraculous. And some people don't realize that, but it truly, your existence, your birth even, was a miracle. And so hopefully you'll take some time to listen to the lyrics in that song and reflect on that song and reflect on your life, and also think about different avenues that you can take in terms of realizing your overall human potential. And so one of the things we are going to be talking about in the redirection, in the getting back on track, is looking at alternative career fields. And so there are a lot of gifts that people have, and we're going to talk about how to utilize those gifts, perhaps in ways that people had not thought about previously. Remember, knowledge is power. So is wisdom and understanding and grace. Take care and see you soon.
What the struggle brings.